Okay, welcome to the review for the midterm exam. So today's Monday. It's going to go out Monday evening. The midterm will be it'll be this weekend. Basically open up Friday um, by noon, certainly, and be available through the weekend till Sunday midnight, something like that. So the first thing to say is that the program or the exam is going to be programs only. Okay, so no questions about programming, no partial bits, what does this code do? None of that. Okay, it'll be programs only. I'm going to make the test, assuming you have a couple of hours, but I'm going to actually give you 3. Okay, so again, the way it's going to work, I think our exams worked back in discrete math like this, where it'll become available at some point on Friday. You can start it whenever you want. Once you start it, you have 3 hours from then to complete it, and you only take it one time. So that'll be the basic way that it goes. Okay. As far as studying for the exam, there are a couple of things um, that you should do. Okay. The first thing is look over the homework programs that you've done. Make sure that you understand how those work. Okay. The second thing is you have to have a good handle on the pieces of the program. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share the whiteboard here. We're going to go through some of the things that are important. Okay. Also, for as far as the schedule this week, remember that Wednesday at 7, we're going to have a live review session. If you can make that, and I'll record that. Hopefully, if not, people remember me or people remind me that are there. Okay, that's the wrong class. Let's get the right class. New stuff here. Okay, so again, this is the Java midterm review. Okay, so when we're creating our programs, okay, there's some different ways that the lines can happen. We started off just doing sequential, where line 1 executes, then 2, then 3. Okay, so there's nothing really new there. You just have to remember and Eclipse will do this for you. The public static void main with string args. We didn't know what all that meant originally, but we should know what all those words mean now. Again, I won't ask you that, but just it'll help you to be able to write your own programs. Okay, so in here we just have the normal way to do things. Okay, the normal step by step. Okay, we can interrupt that flow in a couple of ways. Okay, we have conditional execution. That's with our if, some logical condition in here that evaluates to true or false. And then whatever here is if true. Okay. And then it can continue on. There can be an else if you want. Goes the other way. Other steps, if not, basically. Okay. And also have the else ifs in there with new conditions. Okay. So the conditional is all the if statements that we've done. You should be familiar with this now, but the big thing there is that's equality, that is assignment. Okay, so you got to keep those straight. Okay, in addition to conditional, we also have the repetition. Repetition, we have the while loops. Again, while some condition is true, these will keep happening or keep executing when true. Okay, you have to be careful in there to make sure that you have it moving toward the terminal condition, which means this has to become false at some point. Okay. We also have the for loops, which take first some variable. I usually use a C, unless it's a better thing to use. Okay. C less than 100, for example, C++. Okay. Sorry, that's one of those. And then that would just go, C takes the value of 0 up to, but not including 100, so up to 99. Okay. You never have to use a for. You can always use a while. The for just makes things a little bit quicker. Okay. There's also do while, which I don't think I've ever used, but sometimes it can be useful. Okay. So those are like the playing pieces that we have. Okay. So when you're writing a program, you're going to be able to plug in, like this is some sequential code, and you can plug in some conditional code, and then you may plug in some kind of repetition. Okay, then as part of the repetition, you may have some conditional in there, and so forth. So these are the pieces that you have to be able to do. So you should know and or have well annotated notes that you can point to say you do an if, say you do an if else, an if else if, all that. Okay. So that's really the building blocks. We'll go through a little more detail about what's in each chapter. Okay. The other thing though is you have to be able to read the program, or the program assignment, or the program description, let's say. Okay. Remember, there are two basic types of programs that we're going to do. The book uses this terminology, and I will as well. If it talks about an application, okay, it's going to be a class because everything in Java is a class. Okay, but it's not the normal class. This is going to be an application that's going to have a main method. Okay, and it does not need a test program. Okay, or we can develop a class. Think employee class, date class, things like that. Okay, these we have little UML diagrams. You should be familiar with those. The book talks about those. Okay, where you have the name, you have the attributes, you have the methods. You should be able to read those, move back and forth. Okay, so a class has no main. Okay, it has private, it has public, it uses this sometimes, okay, and it needs a test program. Okay, and then beyond that, as you're reading the program description, you want to sketch out on paper or white pad or something a solution to at least one instance of a problem. Okay, so the one on the hypotenuse, where you're going to send it two sides and it returns the hypotenuse. Okay, so you should know that if we have 3 and 4 as side 1 and side 2, okay, that you're going to send the 3 and the 4 into your hypotenuse function. Send the 3 and the 4, okay, and we know that we're going to have to take the square root of 3 squared plus 4 squared, okay, and we're going to put out a 5. Okay, so you want to start there in getting some real solutions. Okay, from there you would move into, and you've seen me do this, some sections. Okay, you're going to set up variables. Okay, remember you have to do something like this: int side 1, side 2, hypotenuse, whatever. Okay, so I see some of you in the code I'm looking at setting up variables all over the code. It's not the best thing to do. It's best to set them up at the beginning when you can. Okay, and then you would have your ask user for input of sides. Okay, then you would determine hypotenuse. You would print results, and then you would have your other function down here, which would be your hypotenuse function. Kind of put those comments in there to give some structure to your code. Okay, so that's the overview of what you're doing. And again, the more programs you do, the more familiar you are with them, the quicker you get, better things are going to be. Okay, so let's go through specifically what we're doing in each of the chapters. Chapter 1 is all background, so there's not really much of a need to do much with chapter 1. I'm not going to ask you any specific questions. There's no programming there. Okay. So chapter 2 starts off pretty simple. We've done these things a lot. We do some basic print. We do a print line. Remember, with printing, we have the print ln, which prints with a new line at the end. We have just the regular print, which no new line at the end. Okay, and then we have the print f, which takes two things: the format string, which could include %s for strings, %d for ints, and %f, it's f, for floats or doubles. Okay, and then has a list of whatever variables or literals to use there. Okay, so you have the printing that you can do. Remember, we have the crazy scanner thing. You have to import and use that. I always have to look that up. I don't ever remember that. So make sure you have that handy. Okay. Then it just talks about compiling and executing. We'll be using Eclipse for this. That's all pretty straightforward. Okay, then it talks about the printf. It's in section 2.4. Then it talks about the basic arithmetic we can do. We can add things. We can subtract them. Okay. Remember the types we have? We have the ints, and we have the doubles, we have floats. Okay, and we can use the plus, the minus, slash, the star. Okay. Remember the modulo. If you're not familiar with the modulo, make sure you know that. Remember, though, that an int divided by an int returns an int. Okay, so 3 divided by 2 returns a 1, not a 1.5. Okay, we've seen some examples of that. 2.5.2 talks about the scanner object and using the system in, prompting the user, all those things. Okay. Arithmetic is in section 2.7. Just talked about that. That's about all there is in chapter 2. Okay, so most of that, although there are the equality and relational operators on page 2.8. Then we get our first if there. Okay, that's pretty much chapter 2. Chapter 3 then talks a little bit more about classes. Okay, classes as in the example on the right here. This kind of class is in chapter 3. Okay. In fact, it's going to talk about the UML diagram, how to do that. It talks about how to set up a class. It talks about, remember with a class, you want your attributes or member data or whatever to be private, typically. Okay, you have to use the accessor and mutator functions. That's the gets and the sets. Okay, and again, if this is a problem, I would say specifically create a class to model a vehicle. That's how you know you do this stuff. Okay, so remember, you also have to have the constructor, which is how you create a new one of those. That chapter goes through the account class, and again with lots of detail there. Okay. And the rest of that chapter pretty much is all just going through that example. Okay, we're not doing any of the GUI stuff, so you can ignore all of that, at least for now. Okay, so that's pretty much chapter 3. Chapter 4 and 5 both talk about control statements. Okay, so chapter 5 starts off with the idea of algorithms. And again, that's just a way that the computer can solve the problem. So it's a step-by-step way of doing things. Okay. We also have the sequence structure that we talk about on 4.4.1, those UML diagrams that do these little things with the little guys. We did quite a few of those in this chapter. I'm not going to ask you about that, but it's a good tool to know. Okay. So like on the if, it comes down into the diamond. Okay. Then it goes on and ends with a bigger circle around it. And then we've got in here, if the grade is greater than 60, then you go over here and do the print passed. Okay, so you have little things like this for the if statements, a single if. Okay, you have another one for an if else, which is double selection. You can nest those as it talks about. Okay, in 4.6.3, the question mark conditional operator, I just don't like. I think it's hard to read. I wouldn't ask you to do that. You can do it if you want. Okay. We next get to in 4.8 the while statement. Okay, where we can do the while loops. So there's while. Again, some condition is true. Do all these steps. We have to be moving toward this failing, or we're going to have an infinite loop. Okay. Remember, when we're doing while loops, there are two variants. There's the counter-based or counter-controlled, where this value is going to go up 1 every time till it's done. And then you have the other one is called, what do they call it? It's got the sentinel value. I've got a different name for it. Sentinel, it is called sentinel control. Okay, C-E-N, or S-E-N-T-I-N-E-L, sentinel control. That's one's like, I just did a video. If you haven't watched it, you should, on chapter 7, problem 20. The enter 1 through 4 for employee number, or 0 to n. 0 then is the sentinel value. The loop goes around and around and around until they enter that value that ends it. Okay, so examples of that as well in the chapter. You can have nested control statements. 412 talks about the compound assignment operators. You don't need those. The only one I use consistently is the C++ or whatever in a for statement. But the rest of them you can use, the plus, equal, all that, if you want. That's where it's at. Okay. Okay, 414 talks about the primitive data types. There's Appendix D that goes through all of those. They all have different sizes. We've had examples of running out of size on integers sometimes. Again, skip the part about graphics. Okay, which gets us on to chapter 5, which is the control statements part 2. Okay, so this is where we're going to get the for statement. Okay, so 6, we're going to get the for statement, which I talked about before. It's for counter controlled loops. Okay, again, this is just a kind of like a shortcut while loop. You can make identical loops to do the same thing. Okay, but the for is a little quicker. Okay, so it talks about that. There are examples in section 5.4. There's a whole application on compound interest calculations. We get the do while in 5.5. Again, I'm not a big fan, but you can certainly do those if you want. In 5.6, we get the switch. Switch can be a very useful thing. Switches can be a little tricky. I wouldn't ask you specifically to do a switch. You can always do an if, else, but sometimes the switch is a little quicker. Okay, there's 5.7's a auto policy case study with strings and a switch statement. It talks about the break statement and the continue statements and what they do for you. Okay, so the break we know inside of a switch gets us out of that block of code, so we don't go through all the options. Okay, then a continue will take us to the next loop around, and they only work with certain operators. Okay, we also talked about the logical and, which is 2 of those little ampersand guys. Okay, we also have the logical or, which is 2 vertical bars. Okay, and you can use those to make multiple things. Okay, again, the short circuit evaluation of the complex conditions. Yeah, I'm not sure we need that. It's going to, I think, confuse us, so we don't need it. Okay, it kind of summarizes in 5.10 all of the structured programming things that we've talked about. So those are all kind of right there. And then it does more with the graphics, which we're not going to do. Okay. Then we get to chapter 6, looking at methods. Okay, making some more ideas on that. So remember, on our program, we have our public static void main. If it's an application program with string args, we know now this is an array of strings. We further know from the chapter that it includes whatever command line options people pass in. Okay, so we have our main method. We can define other methods if you want. Okay, they'll be public by default. They should be static in an application. The void or int or double, it's going to be the return type. Then we have the method name. We have its parameters. Okay, it can be defined before or after the main. Doesn't matter. Okay. So static was going to refer, if we're writing an application, not a class, then static, we're going to need that keyword if you're defining anything that's not inside of the main, basically. Okay, that's a simplification, but that's the basic idea. But the book talks about how we can use that in 6.3. Okay, 6.4 are methods that take more than one parameter. You can have more than one there, so there's some examples of that. Okay, 6.5 is notes on declaring and using methods. 6.6 is a method call stack and activation records, just that when you call, so if you're inside of main and you call your function 1, it stops what it's doing and calls up function 1. Okay, when it hits a return, then it's back to here. Okay, so either return or hitting the closing bracket of a function will get you back. Okay. 6.7 talks about argument promotion. If you send something an int and it expects a double, it'll promote it to a double typically. Okay, we have a 6.8 talks about some of the Java API packages. We've used some of those. 6.9 talks about random number generation, and it's certainly possible I could ask you a question on that, so be familiar with that. Okay. 6.10 talks about a game of chance, a dice game called Craps, which is an interesting program. It's good exercise to type that in if you want, and also uses the enum or enumeration type, which it doesn't really explain until the next chapter because it's a weird book, but you get the idea. Okay. So it talks in here also about method overloading. Okay, you can have the same name of a function. Okay, so you can have a function called f1 that takes an int. You have a function called f1 that takes a double. You have a function called f1 that takes 2 ints. Okay, as long as the number and or type of parameters change, then you can rename it whatever you want. Okay, and we call that the signature. That's going to wrap up chapter 6. Okay, which gets us to the last chapter we're going to be tested on. That's chapter 7. Okay, so chapter 7. The thing that I'm most interested here is the arrays. There's some stuff there in the class arrays. I'm not as concerned about that. Okay, so remember, array is going to be a homogeneous data structure, which means it's all the same type, all ints or all doubles or all strings or whatever. Okay, it's going to take up contiguous spots in memory. Okay, we're going to start addressing it at 0. So if our array is named A, then A sub 0 would point to this address, and then do 1, 2, 3, and so on. You can get to any of them. It's random access. You have to know in advance, typically, how many you're going to put in it. Okay, and we have an a.length, which will return how long it currently is. Okay, talks about ways to declare variables. We can do something like an int, and again, the square brackets let us know this is a new array of type int, and it's got 12 in it. Okay, the new keyword says go ahead and allocate memory. Okay, then we talk about creating and initializing an array. We can also do something like we can say int array equals and just start putting in the numbers directly. You have to specify all those. Okay. You should be able to go through an array, make changes to it, print out the values, do whatever. Okay. The stuff with bar charts and using arrays to analyze survey results, not as concerned about that. Okay. 7.5 on exception handling is the try catch block. Again, they're going to mention this briefly here, and then they're going to talk about it more in some other chapters. So not too much to worry about there. There's a deck of cards and a shuffling program that are pretty interesting. Okay. 7.8 is important. Passing arrays to methods should be able to do that. And the book is super unclear, but we had to figure it out. And it said later, it usually, this is chapter or section 7.9, it most languages give you the option to pass by reference or pass by value. You don't get that option in Java. It passes most things by value, so it doesn't pass live references. The difference is an object like an array. if you pass an array, then it can make changes in the method. So let's make sure you're aware of that. And that was super unclear in the book. Okay, then there's a case study on a grade book using an array. You can look through that. Okay. Multi-dimensional arrays. Again, all we care about are the two-dimensional arrays. The problem 7 or the problem 20 at the end of the chapter was an example of using two-dimensional arrays. You should be familiar with that. And there's a grade book case study there that's worth going through. Okay, can give you some useful stuff. 713 variable length arguments. I may ask that. That's possible. That's pretty easy. Just got the dots. And the point is, it's in this chapter because when you do that, it sends it as an array. Okay. Command line arguments. We don't have a good way to do that in Eclipse, so we're not going to. So don't worry about that. And in 715 and 716, I'm not going to ask you that either. And also not 717 on the GUI stuff. Okay. So that's it. I say that like it's not much. There's a fair bit there, okay? But it should be things that we've been doing all along, okay? So I've been giving folks some extra time to get homework done, but I really need to grade stuff this week. So make sure you go ahead and put, I'm blurry for some reason. Oh, it's weird, it does it sometimes. Make sure that you go ahead and get the homework turned in as quickly as you can. I'll grade it as I can. There's no guarantee. What if I go backwards? It'll help. Yeah, I don't know what it's doing. I've just gone blurry. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm really blurry. Anyway, so after you look at this, make sure you jot down some questions. There's a forum out there on, maybe this will help if I do this. Okay, so my hand's okay. It's still not focusing. Yeah, I don't know. We need to get really close. I'm not going to worry about it. You don't care if I'm fuzzy or not. There'll be a forum. I think it's already there. If you have questions for the midterm, make sure you post those. I'll try to look at that on Wednesday at 7 when we have our meeting. If not, you can send me an email or a text. We'll try to straighten things out. Okay, that's all I've got for now.